Okay, now I get to do something that I feel so full of gratitude about. I get to introduce two of my favorite people on planet Earth. I have known Jim and Judith Nourse for, let's see, my husband has been dead for 6 years, and we went to the Dhamma together and shared that experience for at least 4 years before that. So they are truly dear human beings in my heart and in my life, and I cherish our friendship, just so you know. Their credentials are too lengthy for me to speak of, but I'll just say Jim is a doctor of psychology as well as an acupuncturist and a student of Chinese medicine. And Judith, my sparkle, is an expert in feng shui and reflexology and just so many other healing modalities. They're both really gifts to planet Earth in my experience, and especially to me in my heart. Jim has published 2 books, both of which I'm proud to own, that have inspired me on my journey and continue to inspire me, by the way. So without further ado, I will introduce my very sweet, special friends, Jim and Judith Nourse.
Jim and I have an agreement that when one is speaking, if the other one has something that we'd like to say, we're going to follow Bernie. Bernie's. Okay. So, thank you, Julie. Shamanism, healing, and the Christ. We use that title because these 3 are themes in our life together as partners. We're approaching 30 years in just a couple of weeks. And we met through actually shamanism. We were both living in the Virginia Beach, that area, and we met at a workshop given by Joseph Rael, beautiful painted arrow from the Pueblo Picaras tradition. And Jim had already been studying with Michael Harner, who some of you may be familiar with, where he learned the shamanic journey. And so in meeting at this workshop, and it wasn't love at first sight, it was just like at first sight, really, truly. And just being interested in each other. We both came from very different paths, but we both were interested very eclectically in spirituality. And so we studied the things that each other was into just because we were just interested. And shamanism has been a part of our married life right through. We do the shamanic journey regularly as a source of guidance, on and off, very regularly, and sometimes, time passes. And also the healing sweat lodge, or the sweat lodge, that we learned from Joseph Rael so many years ago, over 30 years ago. We're actually in a period now where we do a healing sweat lodge every Sunday night, and we have been doing this weekly every Sunday night for about 2 years, and irregularly for about 4 years. And that actually started 4 years ago when a very dear friend of ours, Victor Darcy, was diagnosed with cancer, and he was given 6 months 4 years ago, and he is still here. He has been a source of wisdom for us right along, and for all the years that we know them, but particularly since his journey with cancer began. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But anyway, so shamanism has been a really important thing for us in our partnership, in our relationship, in our spirituality, even though we have gone on many other paths, including time in Buddhism, which we have incorporated and integrated into our spirituality, and Julie mentioned that. And a number of different traditions. Healing certainly is a theme in our lives. It doesn't take but an instant to look at the program here to see that healing is definitely a theme here at Namaste. And there are so many different approaches that are offered here, so many different approaches that there are to practice. And speaking of that, people are becoming very aware that the light is strong in the earth now and getting stronger, and that it seems to be coming through in so many different traditions right now. Something is happening, something is awakening in the earth. The light is awakening in the earth, and people are recognizing through so many different traditions and so many different teachers, Course in Miracles and the Abraham readings and so on, that there is really something awakening in the hearts of people, where we're recognizing we're not just listening to and hearing and repeating that we are divine beings, but we are actually living that, becoming that, through many, many different traditions right now. And it's very exciting. And it's been very exciting for both of us in the practices that we're involved in right now. I was just very recently, I'm reading a book called John the Beloved, not John the Beloved, John of God, that was loaned to me by Sukha. Most of you know Sukha, and she's here today. And she loaned me this book, and I got to a point in it where it talks about how John of God travels, and he travels every week, several days every week, to do healings in different areas. He's from Brazil, and his casa is the healing place that he lives in and works in is in Brazil. But I got to this place a few weeks ago, and I was very excited to read that he must continue to travel because it is so important for him to bring the entities, these doctors who work through him, to different places because they are sharing the light. They are awakening people through awakening the light within people. And I read that and I thought, that's what he's doing. He may do these surgeries and so on, but he's awakening the light in people. And we're hearing that in just a lot of different traditions, a lot of places all over the earth right now. So just very briefly, Jim and I, as I said, we met through shamanism. But also the Christ has become a really important part of our lives. More recently than before. For me, I grew up Jewish on both sides, as Ram Dass says, on my parents' side, I should say. When I was in my mid-20s, I went to Israel. I was very excited and inspired by reading Exodus many, many years ago. And I wanted to live in Israel. So I went there and felt very tearful in the plane as we approached landing in Tel Aviv. Really didn't know why. I thought it was my Jewish heritage, but I really wasn't that into it. While I was living there and working, I was a dental hygienist at the time, and while I was working in a dental office part of the week and working for the Army, the Israeli Army, and their dental clinic near Tel Aviv for part of the week. Christmas came around and I had to be in Bethlehem. I had no idea, and in fact, one of the dentists that I worked with said to me, "But you're Jewish, why would you go to Bethlehem?" I don't know, I just really needed to go there. And so I did with a friend that I had met there, and we paraded through Bethlehem, through what's believed to be the cave. It is the cave that you move through, that's believed to be where the manger was, where the birth of Christ took place. And I really couldn't explain it, except that I didn't know much about Jesus at that time, but I wanted to be there. And many years went by after that where, the story of Jesus, the story of the Christ wasn't a part of my life, but it came and went. It came and went, many different exposures, until in my 30s I was introduced to the Fellowship of the Inner Light and Paul Solomon's readings. I don't know if some of you are familiar with his work, but I was very attracted to study with him. He was like Edgar Casey and lived in Virginia Beach, and his readings were very inspiring to me, and his teachings were. And he reintroduced me, and I say reintroduced because I know that I have history, but he reintroduced me to Jesus and the whole Christ concept. And so I have him to thank for that reintroduction. And the Christ has become, over the years, a very important part of my life. Most recently, and I mentioned Victor Darcy, our friend, who was diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago. He and his wife Anita have been students of Lama Singh's material. Some of you may be familiar with that. And these are also readings, information, inspirational material, that, how sometimes people will try to introduce you to some information and, that really inspires you, and it just doesn't click for you. And that had been happening for many years with me and also with Jim. But at that time when he was diagnosed, for some reason we became very interested in what it was that they worked with, what was their spiritual grounding. And that was the material that was coming through Al Minor, the channel, for over 40 years. And the material in the Lama Singh that was coming through from their source, Lama Singh. And so that over these past 4 years has been a source of inspiration for me and Jim. Now I will turn it over to Jim so he can give you a quick history of his experiences with shamanism, and then we're going to go on and share with you a collage of phrases and concepts that have been deeply moving in us over the past few years, and particularly right now, the central theme being freedom, freeing ourselves. And so, here you go.
Aloha. Like at first sight? Oh. We're going to have to talk afterwards.
I'll mediate.
Oh. We're going to need it. I'm going to talk to you about Jesus. Let me hear you say amen, somebody. Amen. I looked at the title, and it sort of rang in my mind, how do you connect shamanism with the Christ? They seem, at least in conventional circles to be two very opposite end of the spectrum kind of thing. But I want to tell you a little bit of a story about how the connection occurred for me. I was a child of the 60s and did my share of unauthorized field research in psychoactive substances. I see some of my cohort here. But even before that, I left the church when I was about 15. And this was not the kind of church you think about somebody leaving, because they weren't pushing anything on you, really. It was a very middle class, middle brow, kind of easygoing place. And the minister there was the archetypal good man. He was there for you when you needed him. He was a friend, he was a pastor, he was a decent person. And he had one fatal flaw. He gave a lousy sermon. He was not a good speaker. And so the board of deacons, because the membership wasn't increasing and was even falling off a little bit, decided that he had to go. And at age 15, when I was very much aware of the hypocrisy in the world, becoming aware of that, I decided that this is an organization that I didn't want any part of, if that's what it was about. And so I began my young man's path of atheism and questioning and rebellion and alienation, which culminated in my early college years. And at that point, I was an astronomy major. I was looking at the mystery all the way out to the ends of the cosmos. And so I was heavily steeped in the sciences, but I was also an atheistic, existentialist, alienated, camel-smoking young man, if you get the picture. I see some of my cohorts in that respect, too. And a friend of mine convinced me that I should try LSD. And it actually took some convincing. I was a little bit scared of it, but I finally assented, and I had what I regarded at the time as a horrendous experience. Those of you who may remember these experiences, supposed to last 8 to 12 hours. Mine lasted 18. So I am thinking that I am simply psychotic. I'm going to spend the rest of my life being psychotic and trying to get my head wrapped around that reality. I'm lying down on a bed looking up at a ceiling that's textured something like this. Now, those of you who did psychedelics know that you can connect many dots with a texture like this. So the first thing I remember seeing was this image of Jesus on the cross, great suffering. You know, he's there like this. I'm down at the bottom of the cross, looking up, and he looks down at me with this beatific face. And suddenly, that beatific face turns into a sadistic grimace. And he begins tugging his hands away from the nails, and he begins to reach down toward me. I jump up off of the bed. I say, I don't like this. My guide in the experience says, oh, maybe I just gave you too much. Very reassuring, right? So a little bit after this, you know, I'm sort of reconciled to this is where I'm going to be. Lying down again, looking up at the ceiling once again. This time, I see this elephant sitting in lotus position, looking at me very beatifically, but this time it doesn't change into a grimace. Shortly thereafter, what emerges from the ceiling is a being that appears to be half man, half ape, standing there in almost a martial arts type of stance, tearing open his own chest cavity and revealing a male and female figure. So this went on, and it stopped after 18 hours, and I was very relieved. And I was in the student center. This was at Kansas University. Student center at the bookstore, leafing through some textbooks, and I saw this textbook on Oriental philosophy, and I was going through it, and I see in one of the engravings halfway through the book, there's this picture of this elephant sitting in lotus position, which is Ganesh, Ganesha, the Hindu elephant god. A few pages later is Hanuman, the monkey god, tearing open his chest cavity and revealing the masculine and feminine sides of God. So I knew I was not in Kansas anymore. And I changed my major to philosophy and English lit and finally made my way to psychology and developed a keen interest in how in the world could these images be revealed to me when I had no prior exposure to them that I knew of. Of course, I found my way to Carl Jung and the notion of the collective unconscious, and that basic transpersonal take on psychology has been my pathway all these many years. Now, as Judith mentioned, we started doing some work on shamanism through Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow on the one hand, and Michael Harner, who taught us the shamanic journey technique. I felt pretty good about Ganesh and Hanuman. And I won't get into the details of it, but the mythologies of Ganesh and Hanuman had a great deal to say to me. And I'm unpacking all of that to the present day. So this was a very good trip, as bad as it seemed at the time. But this notion of the sadistic Jesus was something that I just couldn't grok. It just did not make sense to me, and it continued to be very disturbing. So I did a shamanic journey. And for those of you who don't know, shamanism is the technology of consciousness, of moving into non-ordinary states of consciousness in order to go into the spirit domain to receive information, to garner wisdom, to get help in healing another person, and so forth. So that's basically the task of the shaman. So we did this, and I didn't realize that when I was taking the psychedelic as a college student that what I was really doing was using a drug-assisted shamanic journey to the upper world. That's what had actually happened. Only about 20% of the shamanic societies on the planet right now make use of psychoactive plants. The other 80% make use of drumming and other modalities to create the non-ordinary state of consciousness. Anyway, did a shamanic journey to the lower world with the question of how do I reconcile the whole experience of Jesus with the question of shamanism, because I was again becoming very interested in the notion of Jesus and the Christ, informed by my psychedelic experience. So, I'm in the lower world, and there is this image of Jesus. It's the best way I know how to describe him. And he's standing there looking very nice. You know, the nice Jesus as he shows up in some paintings, you know, and he's got kind of a faint smile on his face. Looks like his hand's raised in a gesture of blessing. From off to the corner someplace, this bear comes up, and I knew immediately that the bear was the representation of the shamanic universe. And this bear comes bounding over and knocks Jesus down, flat to the ground. What happens is he shatters into a million pieces. And from that shattering emerges this young, vibrant young man, dark-skinned, wearing a loincloth, and he's got a halo around his head. And the halo is made out of, it's a neon bulb. And so he's kind of, you know, dancing around, and the bear's kind of dancing around, and he takes the halo off his head and frisbees it to the bear. The bear grabs it, frisbees it back to Jesus. And this goes on a little bit, and I don't remember which one looked at me like, want to play? Frisbees it to me, and we get this three-way going. And the scene shifts, and I'm lying down, my head in Jesus' lap, and Jesus says to me, communicates to me, the conflict that you're feeling between the two worlds is an illusion. This is all one, and it's all sacred, so be at peace. That was the beginning of recognizing that these two worlds can come together in a peaceful and a harmonious way. A little while later, I did another shamanic journey. This was actually some years later. Jesus spoke to me in this journey and said, you know what? I want to talk with you about your experience on the LSD trip. He said, you didn't have a severe religious upbringing, but you lived in a culture that has portrayed an image, and these are my words now, this is the impression I was getting. You grew up in a culture that portrays an image of God is going to get you. And he said, that experience was all about God is going to get you. And you had to be bounced out of that universe. You had to jump up. You had to say, I don't like this. And then I sent you on a trip to the east. And that's where you saw Ganesh and Hanuman, and that's where you've been all these many years since. He said, it's a time-tested and honorable path. I walked it myself. He also told me, he said, be careful. Don't take anything about me to be true unless you test it against your own experience. He said, particularly don't take it from books. And he said, I do mean any book. Take it directly from me. So it's taken many years for me to come around to feeling an integration of this ancient technology of consciousness found in the shamanic world with the old but more modern take on Jesus and the Christ, and to begin to integrate both of those into my life. And I have found in my explorations up to the present point that there is a phrase that was used by the Buddha, I don't know if I'm quoting it 100% accurately, that applies to my, and I believe our understanding of the Christ in the present time. And the Buddha said, my teachings have a flavor, and the flavor is freedom.
So now we want to talk with you about this theme of freedom, and which has become very much a part of our spiritual seeking in our life. Both of us together really have moved into this search for freedom. And what does this freedom really mean? You know, the Passover is coming up. And in fact, I just want to mention to you that at First Congregational Church over at Laurel Park Highway and Fifth Avenue, we're going to be doing a Seder on our April 22nd. And I know it's okay to mention that here because this group is not in conflict with any other church or group. And also there are people here from First Congregational who we love very deeply, and we really honor and feel a very heartfelt connection to that group of people over there as well. So I wanted to just let you know that we're going to be going through the Seder there, the Seder ceremony there, and that's April 22nd. It's a Friday evening. That's the night of the first Seder. The way that we're going to be doing it is not the traditional interpretation. You know, a Passover Seder there's a booklet that's read, and it's the story of the release. Passover is all about the release of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. That's what this story is about. Well, many years ago, early in our marriage, we were studying with someone in Virginia Beach, Sam Bowski, who was a Kabbalist. We were studying Kabbalah with him, And I said to him, you know, Sam, it was coming to be Passover time, and I said, there are places in this story, there are words and phrases in this story that just don't make sense to me. You know, we read it every year, but it just doesn't, I don't understand what they're talking about, and I don't think anybody else does. And he said, well, let's go back to the original Hebrew for those phrases, and if you know anything about Hebrew, every letter in Hebrew is actually an entire concept, and actually sometimes several different concepts. They're hieroglyphs. So what we did was we took some of the phrases, went back to the Hebrew, and then took each one of those Hebrew letters and wrote down the concepts for each of those letters, and then we put it all back together again, and it meant something really different. What it was talking about was not freedom from slavery in Egypt, which is like, how do you relate to that now, today? But it's about freedom of us, our freedom from the limiting beliefs that we live with here in the earth. And that spoke so much to me and has become so much to me over the years, even more so now. And what Jim and I are studying and working with now is all about that, is all about freedom. And we believe that this is what's going on all over the world right now, with the light awakening in people, recognizing who we are, truly who we are, not simply on words, not simply in books, but truly recognizing the light that is within us, the creative light that is within us, and that we can use this and use this knowledge to look at the limiting beliefs that we've been living with and to free ourselves, that we can be here in the earth and live as the divine creations that we really are. So, if each one of you, we're going to share some things that are very meaningful to us right now, that really move deeply within us. And if each one of you goes home with one little thought that gives you something to hang on or hook into, that helps you to free yourselves, then we will feel like we've done what we wanted to do by coming here. So here we go. So first of all, setting ourselves free. I really believe this, that most of us don't realize that we are in bondage and that we really are slaves to so many limiting beliefs, and that, and I'm quoting here, that we are prisoners of habit. And I'm quoting here from some of the work of Al Miner and the material that's come through his source, which has named itself Lama Singh, that we are prisoners of habit. That's where we really are in bondage, through our thoughts, through our behaviors, our emotional reactions. We've all heard this before, but it's just a circling around to, is this really true, and how can we empower ourselves? Also, beliefs in limitation. Just to think about, to spend time thinking about how we feel we're limited, whether it's in our careers, whether it's in our family relationships, it's even in our spirituality. How are we limited? What beliefs have we adopted and that we're living by that are keeping us in bondage? So I wanted to just, I'm not a proponent of reading to people, but I do want you to hear just a little bit of the language that's so inspiring, has been so inspiring to us in these past 4 years, that that we are prisoners of habits, of dogma. And perhaps most people don't have any idea that we are imprisoned, but only bear the end result as a manifestation of this. In other words, that's what we have created. We've heard this before, that we've created everything about our lives, that we're not victims of what's happening in our lives, that we truly, with our beliefs, have created what is going on. And then, even then, if we believe it, how frequently are we willing to forego the potential for joy because we'd rather cling to the familiar, cling to that which is known and therefore comfortable, rather than to draw upon the scenario of self-discovery that is required to break oneself free. So how do we free ourselves? For example, there are a number of methods that are being used right now. One of them is Ho'oponopono, which Jim has written about, which we have practiced together for over 8 years. And Ho'oponopono, do you want to talk about that?
Go ahead.
That there's this philosophy of cleaning, that when we recognize something within us that is, or something out here that creates discomfort for us, whether it's Iraq, whether it's terrorism, terrorist activities, whatever it is, that's hearing about human trafficking, which truly is slavery right here in front of us, but out there, when we hear these things and they create discomfort within us, Ho'oponopono says that it's creating discomfort within us because we have data bits within us, within our subconscious, that we need to clean out. And when we do that, we clean these out, not just in ourselves, but for all beings, for all creation. Well, how does that really happen? And that's a big question that comes up for people who study Ho'oponopono. And Jim and I just recently were talking about that. And here we have something that came from Lama Singh. Lama Singh talks about that we are all connected to each other. And this is how oneness actually is happening within all of creation, by these lines of light that literally connect us to each other. Lines of light. That concept, I've never heard that before in all the spiritual studies, that the concept of that we have lines of light that connect us with our loved ones, with friends, with anyone that we've had interactions with this lifetime, many other lifetimes, that anything that changes within us travels through these lines of light to all of our connections. And there is the concept of oneness. And it really spoke to us. So that seems to speak to us of how Ho'oponopono works. If we are able to clear a limiting belief from within our own subconscious, that's how it happens, that it happens for all beings, through these lines of light, through these connections. Buddhism talks about, and here we're talking specifically about emotional reactions. These are habits, getting angry, getting frustrated, getting very upset and judgmental about what's happening out here. Buddhism says observe it, correct? Observe it. Just step back from it and observe it. This is not you. Observe it. Okay, that works. It does work to a certain degree. Thich Nhat Hanh teaches us, use the phrase, anger arises. Step back from it. It's not within us. And watch it. Okay?
There's one thing about Thich Nhat Hanh. Somebody asked him a question, in a group said, "Do you ever get angry?" Because those who know him know he's this diminutive, very peaceful man. And his response was interesting. He said, "From time to time, anger arises." And I say, "Hello, old friend." You get this? Anger arises. It's out here and it comes up. It arises in me.
So, here's one step further. And this we also got from the teachings of Lama Singh. He says, name it. That when we name something, we claim power over it. We also recognize that you are, here's the language, I name you. You are an emotional reaction from within me. It's a little different, isn't it? It's a different philosophy, but maybe it speaks to you. It did to us. You are an emotional reaction from within me. I created you. We are divine beings. We have the ability to create, and we do all the time. So, taking responsibility, look how you bring it together. Ho'oponopono says, I am responsible for everything out there. Here, I name you. You are an emotional reaction from within me. We are creator beings. I claim that. I created you. Now, what do I do? Now what's happened is you are holding, I created you, you are holding me in bondage. Every time something triggers that anger, I am in bondage. I am being held as a slave, even to the point of creating dis-ease. When I was in nursing school, we heard that 85%, in fact it was in our textbook, 85% of all illness is related to emotions that we're holding. I think it's more. I think it's like 100%. So here we have emotions that we create, thoughts that we create, and they hold us then in bondage. So what do we do with them? Well, here is what's offered by Lama Singh. Claim our authority to bless them with the healing love and grace of the Christ. I love that phrase. Bless them with the healing love and grace of the Christ. Release them to go on to be transformed. Release them to the Christ, to go on to be transformed to their highest good. These are creations, things that we've created, but now they've held us in bondage. Release them so that they can go on to become their highest good.
Can I say something?
Please. Yeah.
I think most would agree here that anyone who is an oppressor is themselves oppressed. They're operating under a mandate that makes them do what they do. What Jesus said on the cross, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. Take that inside and look upon anything that comes up in us that we experience as oppressive, of making demands on us, pressuring us. Father, forgive that, for it knows not what it does. We're saying that our habitual reaction is to get into a struggle with what comes up in us, the anger, the fear, the obsessive thoughts, all of these habits, and instead take the Christed approach, which is to offer it blessing. This is Ho'oponopono. Something comes up, we're distressed. What do we say? In Ho'oponopono we say, I love you. Thank you. It's a welcoming. The welcoming prayer as part of centering prayer. We welcome you, the oppressor that comes in. And in the Lama Singh language, I bless you. I extend to you the love and the healing grace of the Christ. because that which is oppressing us is itself oppressed. And what we are doing in this approach is offering that within us freedom. We are setting it free so that it may come to its own highest potential, and thereby setting ourselves free at the same time.
Thank you. So we're at 12:15 right now. Nobody actually told us how long. So
Anybody feeling oppressed?
So we have much more that we would like to share, but this may be a good time to stop. And thank all of you. Thanks to all of you for listening to us, for being here today. And I think we just need to wrap it up now. And
See you in April.
yeah, we will keep